Yeah,
We'll talk
thank
about
you.
that. Okay, so we are going to keep this pretty informal. I mean, I know that this is not training so much as just an opportunity to ask any questions that you have on your mind, and we'll try to answer them. I mean, I feel like with the different chair manuals and the ethics documentation and everything, that there's no need to do a PowerPoint on these are the expectations of YALSA, but there are some gray areas that I think come up from year to year. And that's what this is more about, just trying to help you all to go into things, or, you know, into your year, or wherever we are in the year now, feeling a little bit more comfortable about some of the things that may be a little bit gray still. So. So one of the areas that several of you had indicated on the questionnaire was that you might have some questions about or just want to talk about a little bit, was the policies and procedures, eligibility kinds of things. So if there are specific questions in that area, if you want to throw them out there, we've got a lot of really great experience from the folks who are on the oversight committee this year. And I think between everyone here and Nicole definitely is the voice of wisdom, we can get some things answered.
I have one thing I've kind of been wondering about, because it came up when I was on nonfiction, and it's come up, and I think that was probably the first time. What about books that were originally published as adult books and then now they have a young reader's edition? I assume that we can count those. It kind of bugs me a little bit, but that's the material. That's not my personal opinion about it. But I just want to double check on that.
Yeah,
I remember having a long conversation about that, like a year or two ago, and it was like how to figure out repackaging versus rebranding, and it was like how significant are the changes between the adult and the YA version. So like if it's just a new like a new title, then it was kind of like not a new book or anything. But if it was like actually adapted, then it seemed to make it like it was actually a lean towards greater eligibility, but it was still kind of a gray area. We left it up to the committees to sort of make the final decision, I believe.
Yeah, when I was on nonfiction, we read a lot of them in nonfiction. There are a lot of them, at least our year. For some reason, there was copious amounts. And we just would read them and then try to make sure that they were unique enough, so different enough, like Rob was saying, like from the adult version of it. So if it seemed like it was still the same language being used and it was still geared towards an adult audience, then we would rate it so low that it wouldn't even get nominated. But if it appeared as though it was rewritten or had been edited enough, adapted enough for a teen audience in mind, then we would continue considering it. So we would read them, like we would still read them, just to make sure, because sometimes you can't tell right until you start reading it whether it's actually been adapted, truly adapted, as opposed to just, like Rob said, a new cover and a new title. So
well, I think that kind of brings up a question that I had in a similar vein. Are we always dependent on the publisher, you know, sharing it for a YA audience, or do you always have to have that wider, like this is like, I mean, I'm nonfiction, so if the publisher is publishing it under an imprint that's typically for YA or a middle grade audience, are you relying on that, like, or you just have to read so widely because it might be a perfect for that, you know, 12 to 18 range? And so I guess where does that always fall sometimes?
I've just been looking at recommended reading levels or age levels. If it says 8 to 12, because that's what the Prince did last year, because I did ask about this. If it says 8 to 12, then we can consider it. But if it's, yeah, that is a good question.
Yeah, with the overlap between sort of that 12 to 14 with Alskielsa, I mean, it's always a bit of a challenge. We had the same thing when I was on Prince. We had the same thing when I was on Newberry. And it was like, if it hits that 12 to 14 range, it is sort of up to the committee to take a look and see if they think that it fits as they understand it. And, or if they think, well, no, this is just not for us. It's too young. But it's one of those things where you kind of have to talk it through. Sorry, no simple answers.
I know. Well, it never is. And I guess in terms of just kind of like talking out loud, the idea would be not necessarily to make that decision early on, but once you have that depth and breadth of reading widely enough to say, we're ready to make that decision that we are not going to consider X, but we'll consider Y. Or do you see that being something that you come straight out of the gate that helps you focus from the beginning because of the onslaught of titles that could be published? I mean, how have committees done that in the past?
We've already come up with this a little bit. Well, the first book that was nominated is one that's rated years 8 to 12. And it belongs nominated. Some of the other 8 to 12, there's no way. I think you have to look at each book individually.
I kind of
Yeah,
agree. Like we would still read it and then make a decision. So, I mean, it's a lot of reading, but you wouldn't fit, like a lot of those we wouldn't finish. Like you could read half of it and be like, no, that's for an 8-year-old. Like, or you'd read half of it and be like, oh, this is for like a 12-year-old. Like, I'm going to keep reading it. So yeah, sometimes you just have to, I'm all for just reading it or looking at it.
I remember the year I was on Newberry, and a lot of people, when the announcements were happening, and all these people around me were like, where's Navigating Early? Where's the book Navigating Early? Why isn't it on the Newberry? And then all of a sudden it came up with Prince, and they were like, oh, you know what? That actually makes a little more sense. So like, sometimes it's like, it says 8 to 12, but is it really 8 to 12, or is it really more like 12?
Yeah.
So that
So
range.
it's okay to roll with it throughout the entire year and not have to have like an established stance at the beginning to say we will look at this and we won't look at that. So that's helpful.
Another thing I would say is that like some of the ones that were 8 to 12, we really liked at the beginning, but by the time we got to the end, like you were saying, like you have a wider breadth of reading, then you're like, actually, this 8 to 12 book is kind of written younger compared to this other one and isn't standing up to all these other ones. So yeah, I think you'll probably get to that point once you get further along.
And that goes with a lot of the books, not just based on age, but based on knowledge of what you've read.
Mhm.
Yeah, it can be frustrating at times, but I think that's how it plays out. And I was thinking, it was interesting because I was on Cybert this year. And if you look at Cybert and nonfiction, they really overlapped with All 13 and How We Got to the Moon. But when you look at both those books, they are really nice for both audiences.
I'm just going to jump in and point to the other end of the spectrum. So to kind of touch on Alex, very rarely is a book in a gray area between adult and young adult, but it sometimes happens, especially with like an independent publisher who is marketing to both audiences, and then it's not clear their intended audience. So like for Prince, especially if there's an unclear book, you can check with the committee and they can kind of on the down low check and see if Alex is considering it or see how Booklist reviewed it to determine where it falls, if it's adult or young adult.
Thank you. I've run into that a couple of them. They'll say 16 plus or 18 plus. And of course, 18 is, and you're like, what do we do with those? And thank you for answering that.
Yeah, we just want to make sure Alex and Prince aren't awarding the same books.
Mhm.
Makes sense.
I remember the conversations around like Red, White, and Royal Blue and things like that. Like people were reading it and saying it was like upper YA, but I was kind of like, is it? Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
then Alex made the choice for us.
the house on the Cerulean Sea this year, I had read that and I was like, this is so amazing, but it was so YA-ish, but it's got this, 40-year-old protagonist and everything. So I was very happy to see that it was part of the Alex lineup, but yeah, some of them do get very blurry there.
And like TJ Wright's young adult and adult.
Right.
And then Emily Danforth was on Alex this year with her adult book, and Tochi Onyenbuchi writes young adult. So there's a lot of crossover there.
Yeah, I think it really just is a case by case situation. Not unfortunately, but it does. I know it seems a little more difficult than just being able to point and say like, this is the rule, but
that does bring up
Publishers
a good point. We really do try to give the committees room to make some of those decisions. I mean, we want to be involved if you are just kind of running into something and you are feeling like, I really don't know what the right thing to do is here, but we don't ever want you to feel like you have to, like if there's a book that you're discussing for these reasons, like you have to involve your oversight liaison, because we're definitely, we want to make sure that things are done properly. But if you're running into a situation where something is just kind of on the borderline, that's really you and your committee members have a lot of knowledge and can figure out a lot of those too. We're here if you need us, but don't feel like you have to come to us with everything. So,
All right, I'm going to switch gears. I think my only real question was about the use of Edelweiss and NetGalley in terms of, the committees starting to, like I use it heavily and always have. And so requesting it because like I would have automatically been reading it and requesting it anyway versus stopping and waiting. Like, I guess the back end of Edelweiss and NetGalley, I don't necessarily understand, like, do they know I'm on the committee and therefore not going to review it? Do I wait and as the chairperson, contact that publisher, say these are on there, like, and they release them with the expectation? How does that work? And can we advocate for our committee members just to be the way they would be on those sites? I don't know if I'm making myself clear. Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think as the admin assistants are reaching out to publishers, because publishers have the say in who's approved for NetGalley and Edelweiss, right? I mean, that's not just those two platforms approving things, they're running it by the publishers. So I don't see anything wrong with somehow, I mean, if they have the lists of the committee members or they can get those. So I don't think there's anything wrong with saying these are the folks that are on this committee. We would like to be approved for all of your things, just so we can, all of your young adult publications, so that we have easier access to them.
yeah, I think it's about running, like if it's the chair or the admin assistant who is running it by the publisher and asking for access, it's one thing. If you are as an individual going in and starting, it can get a little trickier, because then it makes it look like you're starting to be like, publishers might be like, oh, this person's on the committee and they're asking for these particular titles. Maybe that's an indicator. Even if you're not, it could get interpreted that way. So I think if you see something on Edelweiss and you're like, oh, that would be a good one to request, best thing to do might be run it by your chair or admin assistant to just make sure it's being asked for the whole committee.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, I mean, I've been on, I probably don't write reviews for more than, I don't know, maybe 15% of the books that I get off of those, and it's never been an issue. So I don't think they're going to penalize you if you're not writing anything. I mean, I think that's just kind of expected, that the number of e-galleys that they're sending out, they're not going to get a huge return on the reviews being written.
Yeah, I
I was
say,
just gonna say, I've been using NetGalley and Edelweiss for years and almost never review, and they don't like punish me for it. I like denying requests or anything.
I was also gonna say, on last year on Cyber with COVID, a lot of publishers, that's how they got us books. Was with Edelweiss and NetGalley, or eGalley's through there. So I don't know if they'll naturally be doing that again this year.
Yeah, they might be sending out like emails with like the widgets to committee members if they're requested, or if they're just like, we don't have any of these physical arcs, they might just do that proactively. But if you don't see them coming in by like either of those two ways, then I think it's okay to ask the chair or admin
Yeah,
person
it's been
to
nice.
just
I mean,
request.
we've gotten, you know, a couple packages of print already, which bodes well. And I think especially from the nonfiction perspective, I can't imagine reading as much as they did last year digitally, just because nonfiction is just such a bear for text boxes and photos and all of the, you know, formatting and things like that, just like, you know, things like graphic novels and stuff would be. So the good thing is so far we've had a couple print deliveries already, which is nice. And
Thank you for mentioning that, Alicia, because I've been worried we've only gotten a couple also. So, and I figure it's just because people are still working from home in a lot of places, but it makes me feel good to know that y'all haven't received a whole lot yet. Though I have received feedback from publishers that they're going to send stuff. So.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like that anxiousness. I was like, I want them all right now to be ready, like dive in. But, you know, it's that slow trickle of, you know, patience. I think I probably overkilled. I sent a couple extra emails to introduce and be ready. And then I was like, oh, I really don't have anything more to email right now. So I think I just, you know, I could have probably backed off at the beginning. I was just so super excited. So
every year people are like, when are the books coming? And then by the end of the year, you eat your words because you were like, stop, I don't want any more books.
100%. And then sometimes they'll forget that you're not on the committee anymore and still send. I'm still getting Stonewall books, and I was on that committee in 2011.
Cool.
I just got one in the mail like last week, a nonfiction book. I was like, this was like 2 years ago, but whatever, I'll read it.
It happens.
What questions do you all have about, let's start with annual, because that's coming up in the not too distant future, and it is virtual again. Are you feeling pretty confident about things? Do you have some things you want to talk about?
I was just gonna jump in. Sorry, did I interrupt someone? So you all, because it's virtual, you are not required to meet at annual like you would be if it were in person. So you are not required to register or attend. However, it could be a good opportunity for you to attend annual, you know, since I'm sure a lot of times when you're attending annual or midwinter, you are in meetings. Now, LibLearnX, which is the new midwinter, I don't have a lot of information, unfortunately, except for I do know that it is scheduled to be hybrid. So I'm not sure what that means for your committees, but, you know, maybe we need to be thinking now, if people don't want to travel, the meeting, it should be set up to kind of handle that. And I don't know if you also will require it or not. But yeah, that's all I don't have much information.
So so our committee members do not have to register for annual. Okay, I gave them false information. I will correct it.
And if we were in person, you would be required to meet, but yeah, since it's virtual, no.
Okay.
Speaking of meetings, how are they going? Are you trying to get together with your committees periodically to just kind of get into that rhythm of discussing titles and things. I guess this is kind of when that would be starting, because last month you probably wouldn't have had a whole lot to review. But
The also link I was sent did not work. Fortunately, one of our committee members has access to Zoom and got the meeting connected, and we're just going to use her the rest of the year because we can control it. But I was getting all these panicked emails. We can't get on, and I couldn't get on. So I was lucky I had I have a fantastic committee, by the way.
I haven't set up a first one, but it was going to be, within this next, month. And I've kind of set up the agenda and rehashing, what our mission is, and then starting. So if you're saying, basically within the next month, it should be happening. And I guess in terms of, like I know as some of the committees, like they're, the more the selection committees versus the award committees, you've got there are so many titles for selection committees versus, I mean, still obviously a lot for the award committees, but I was going to kind of ease into it and do like once a month for a couple months and then do like twice a month. I mean, is that generally standard?
yeah, I mean, I think it definitely ramps up towards the end of the year, but the more you can do in the first 6 or 7 months, I mean, just kind of gets everybody into that rhythm so that when all the crazy stuff starts, in September, October, November, then get ready.
It helps to have like the format of your meeting down too, because then once you start sitting down, when you have a ton of titles, you can sort of start blasting through them as opposed to just starting to figure it out when you have a ton of titles picking up.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I chaired the Odyssey committee last year, and we did do a virtual annual. I would say the thing that was tricky about it was because of the timing of the pandemic and everybody kind of scrambling to figure out what they were doing. We did not have a lot of submissions. Like we were very heavy with one publisher who had like everything was already set up digitally. So we basically were like only reviewing titles from that one publisher at annual. So it ended up being like a very short meeting. I don't even think we did a full day. So I think the monthly meetings and check-ins are a good way to start to ease into. And then, you can kind of maybe set like a save the date for annual, around then, but then kind of reevaluate, depending on, hopefully this year the publishers have a little bit more experience after last year that they will be sending things out a little bit quicker, and then some are returning to the office, things like that. But just that's sort of what I figured out halfway through was, oh, actually monthly meetings makes a little more sense.
I think it also makes it easier to get rid of titles you don't like faster that way. You're not, and it's fresh in their mind. So it's easier to be like, nope, we're going to put that one to the side now. So yeah.
One of the things that had come up on the survey that Nicole sent out was just managing the workflow and time commitments and that kind of stuff. And we may have addressed some of that with the monthly meetings and everything, but if there are other questions there, we can chat about those. And we don't have to.
Everybody seems so confident already.
Oh, please, not at all. Is anybody using I just decided to kind of do everything inside, Google, because it's where I'm most comfortable, and asking everybody on the committee, that was kind of their thoughts too. But there's the ALA Connect, that inside portal. Is anybody using that for their stuff?
We're using ALA Connect for some discussion about the books, and people especially ones that people really disliked or who really thought thought were good, but we're also using Google Docs and several other things also.
I think the committee last year, Alicia, did use ALA Connect to discuss books. Somehow I was on that, I was in that grouping and I would see that they were like talking about it and I would quickly just delete it. But I think they did use that for some discussion too, but I didn't use it. We just used Google Docs the whole time pretty much.
That's been me too, Rachel. Every time I see one come through, I'm like, delete, delete, delete. I don't
I
want
know,
to.
I'm like, I'm not supposed to, I'm like, I don't want to know any of this. Like, please delete.
I just don't want to spoil anything for myself.
Yes. Okay, what else is on y'all's minds? So I do want to come back around to the issue that Becky noticed and brought to everyone's attention with the 2020 books that got pushed back to 2021. But I want to make sure I'm not cutting off any other conversation first. So Nicole had a suggestion that we come up with some kind of, Google form where if the publishers, if we can send it out to all the publishers and they respond, it goes into a database that's available to all of the chairs. So it's the publishers telling us which of their books have been pushed back so that we know what to keep an eye out for. And I'm not sure of the logistics of that, but I think we can figure it out. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah. Okay. It seems like there were a good number, at least that got pushed back to later in 2020. I'm not sure if it was kind of an equal number that then got pushed back to 2021 or not, but okay. So Nicole, you have like the contact lists for all the publishers. How is that normally?
Yeah, so, I checked on a couple titles for Janet and they said that there was a few. I have a contact list. I can make a form or try to make a form and get it sent out. And then we can just share a spreadsheet and you could add to it, like if you find titles.
Mhm.
But I think the important thing is that we might need to do some double checking this year, just because, because 2020, right? Just to make sure we don't miss anything. So if you're like, wait, this was reviewed as this, but in the cover page it says this, do a couple double checks.
Okay. What else, guys? You feeling good about things? Are there any questions about, I don't even want to call it chain of command because it's not really chain of command, but do you feel comfortable with, if you do have a question about something, who to reach out to and all that? Okay.
Yeah, I start with the past chairperson first. Like, hey, if you ran into this, please share that. And she's amazing and wonderful. So
Yes, she is.
like, shout out to